They say money can't buy happiness, but it can certainly buy revenge. For 3 years, Sarah washed the floors of the Reynolds mansion, treated worse than a servant by her husband Mark and his cruel mother. She stayed because she believed in their vows. But the night Mark threw her out into the freezing rain to make room for his pregnant mistress, he made the biggest mistake of his life. He didn't check the mail that morning. If he had, he would have known that the worthless orphan he just evicted had just inherited the Kensington Group, the billion-dollar empire that owned the very company Mark worked for. This is the satisfying story of how a discarded wife went from homeless to the boss of her ex-husband. You won't believe how she reveals herself. The sound of crystal glasses clinking against one another echoed through the grand dining room of the Reynolds estate. It was supposed to be a celebration. Mark Reynolds, the golden boy of the family, had just secured a vice president position at Apex Dynamics. But for Sarah, his wife of 3 years, it felt more like a sentencing hearing. Sarah adjusted the collar of her worn-out dress. It was the only nice thing she owned, bought from a thrift store 4 years ago. She stood by the kitchen door, holding a tray of caviar blinis, her hands trembling slightly. "Sarah, honestly, do we have to send a search party?" Eleanor Reynolds, Mark's mother, screeched from the head of the table. Eleanor was a woman who wore her wealth like armor. Her pearls were real, but her smile was entirely fake. "My guests are starving, and you're back there daydreaming. Move it." "I'm sorry, Eleanor," Sarah whispered, rushing forward to place the tray on the table. "It's Mother Reynolds to you," Eleanor snapped, snatching a napkin. "And look at your nails. They're chipped. It's embarrassing. I told Mark he was marrying beneath him, but he's just too charitable." The guests, a collection of Mark's colleagues and wealthy neighbors, tittered quietly. Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She looked toward Mark for support, but he was too busy laughing at a joke made by the woman sitting next to him. That woman was Jessica Thorne. Jessica was everything Sarah wasn't. She was the daughter of a local real estate mogul, draped in red silk that cost more than a car, with blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She had her hand resting casually, possessively on Mark's forearm. "Mark," Sarah said softly, "happy anniversary." The table went silent. Mark slowly turned his head, his eyes cold and annoyed. He looked at Sarah as if she were a stain on his expensive Italian rug. "Not now, Sarah," Mark said, taking a sip of his scotch. "We're discussing business. Go back to the kitchen and bring out the roast." "But it's been 3 years today," she persisted, her voice shaking. "I thought maybe we could." "You thought what?" Jessica interrupted, her voice like syrup laced with arsenic. She looked at Sarah with pitying eyes. "Oh, honey, you didn't tell her, Mark." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "Tell me what?" Mark sighed, standing up. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and threw it onto his plate. "I didn't want to do this in front of everyone, Sarah, but you're making a scene, as usual." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick brown envelope. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the mahogany surface and stopped right in front of Sarah. "Divorce papers," Mark stated flatly. "I've signed them. You just need to sign and get out." The room spun. "Mark, why?" "Why?" Eleanor cackled, taking a sip of wine. "Look at you, girl, you're a mouse. Mark is a lion. He needs a queen, not a maid. And frankly, your cooking has been subpar lately anyway." Mark put his arm around Jessica's waist, pulling her close. Jessica beamed, placing a hand on her stomach. "Jessica is pregnant, Sarah." Mark dropped the bomb without a shred of remorse. "She's carrying my heir, a son, something you couldn't do in 3 years. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the gut. They had never really tried. Mark was always too tired or too busy. Now she knew why. "You're kicking me out, tonight?" Sarah asked, tears spilling over. "I have nowhere to go. I have no family. You know that." "Not my problem," Mark sneered. "I've been generous enough letting you live here this long. You came from the gutter, Sarah. It's time you went back there." "Get her bags," Jessica commanded, snapping her fingers at the actual hired house staff, who looked uncomfortable but obliged. Minutes later, Sarah was standing on the front porch. The heavy oak door slammed shut in her face. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the sky opened up. It was a torrential downpour. 2 black garbage bags containing her clothes were tossed out a side window, landing in a mud puddle. Inside, she could hear the laughter erupt again. They were toasting to her departure. Sarah fell to her knees in the mud, clutching the wet plastic bags. She had $40 in her pocket and no coat. She was 26 years old, and her life was effectively over. Or so she thought. She dragged herself to the bus stop at the end of the long driveway, shivering violently. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost ignored it, thinking it was Mark texting her a final insult. She pulled it out. It was a blocked number. "Hello?" she croaked, her teeth chattering. "Is this Sarah Jenkins Reynolds?" a deep professional voice asked. "Yes," she sniffled. "Who is this?" "My name is William Sterling, senior partner at Sterling Vance & Associates. I have been trying to reach you all day, Mrs. Reynolds. It is regarding your grandfather, Arthur Kensington." Sarah froze. I don't know an Arthur Kensington. I was adopted. I never knew my biological family." "Yes, we know," the lawyer said. "Mr. Kensington passed away yesterday morning. He has been watching you from afar for years, Sarah. He wanted to see if you maintained your kindness despite the hardships. He left you a video message and, well, everything else." "Everything else?" "Mrs. Reynolds, where are you? I need to send a car. It is not safe for the sole owner of the Kensington Global Group to be standing in the rain." The limousine that picked Sarah up was longer than the bus she had been waiting for. The driver, a man named Henry with kind eyes, opened the door and handed her a thick wool blanket and a bottle of Fiji water. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you at the Four Seasons, ma'am," Henry said. "He thought you might prefer a hotel suite over coming to the office tonight." Sarah sat in the back, stunned. The leather seats were warm. The contrast between the cold mud of the Reynolds driveway and the silent luxury of this car was jarring. When she arrived at the hotel, she wasn't treated like the wet, bedraggled woman she looked like. The staff bowed. They ushered her into the penthouse suite, a room larger than the entire first floor of the house she had just been kicked out of. William Sterling was waiting. He was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Mark made in a month. "Please, sit," William said gently. He didn't look at her wet clothes with judgment. He looked at her with respect. He played a video on a tablet. An old man appeared on the screen. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. Sarah's eyes. "Sarah," the man in the video wheezed. "If you are watching this, I am gone. I am your grandfather. My daughter, your mother, ran away when she was young. She died in childbirth, and you were lost to the system. By the time I found you, you were married to that Reynolds boy. I didn't trust him, so I tested you. I wanted to see if money was what you were after, or if you had a good heart. You stayed loyal to a man who didn't deserve you. You are strong. Now it is time for you to be powerful." The screen went black. William slid a stack of documents across the marble coffee table. "Arthur Kensington owned the Kensington Group," William explained. "Real estate, technology, shipping, and banking. His net worth was estimated at $4.2 billion. As his only living relative, it is all yours. The houses, the jets, the liquid cash, and the controlling shares of the company." Sarah stared at the papers. "Billion? With a B?" "Yes, ma'am, you are currently one of the wealthiest women in the country." Sarah laughed. It was a dry, hysterical sound. "An hour ago I was crying because I lost my husband." "If I may speak freely, ma'am," William said, closing a folder. "We have done extensive background checks on Mark Reynolds. He is a mid-level manager with a gambling debt and a mortgage he can barely afford. The promotion he celebrated tonight? He only got it because his company, Apex Dynamics, is trying to secure a loan from your bank." Sarah's eyes widened. "My bank?" "The Kensington Group owns First National. Apex Dynamics is currently begging First National for a bailout to avoid bankruptcy. Mark's promotion is contingent on that deal going through." A slow, cold realization washed over Sarah. The sadness in her heart began to calcify into something harder, something sharper. She remembered the way Eleanor had laughed. She remembered Jessica's hand on her stomach. She remembered the garbage bags in the mud. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice steady for the first time that night, "does Mark or his family know about this inheritance?" "No one knows." "Your grandfather kept his family life completely sealed. As far as the world knows, the Kensington heir is a mystery." "Good," Sarah said, standing up and walking to the window. She looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Mark and Jessica were sleeping in her bed. "Mr. Sterling, I need a new wardrobe. I need a makeover. And I need to learn everything about Apex Dynamics." "Of course," William nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "And what should I tell the board of directors regarding the loan for Apex Dynamics?" Sarah turned around. The fearful, mousy housewife was gone. In her place stood the granddaughter of a tycoon. "Tell them the new CEO wants to review the account personally. Schedule a meeting with the executive team of Apex Dynamics for next week. Tell them to bring their new vice president of sales." "Mark Reynolds?" "Yes." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he evicted his boss." The next 3 days were a whirlwind. Sarah didn't just change her clothes. She changed her skin. She hired a top-tier stylist. The mousy brown hair was cut into a sharp, sophisticated bob and dyed a rich chestnut. The thrift store rags were replaced by tailored Chanel suits, Italian leather heels, and a simple diamond necklace that cost a small fortune. But the physical change was the easy part. The mental shift was harder. She spent 12 hours a day with William Sterling and the Kensington Board of Directors. She learned about PL statements, leverage, and corporate strategy. She was intelligent. She had always been, but Mark had beaten her confidence down so far she had forgotten it. Now, with every spreadsheet she mastered, she felt herself coming back to life. On the 4th day, Sarah sat in the back of the limousine, reviewing the file on Apex Dynamics. "They are in worse shape than I thought," Sarah murmured to William, who sat opposite her. "Yes," William agreed. "Management has been siphoning funds. They are desperate for this $50 million injection from us. Without it, they liquidate by Friday." "And Mark?" "He's been parading around town," William said, handing her a tablet. "Social media posts." Sarah looked at the screen. It was a photo of Mark and Jessica at a car dealership. They were posing next to a brand new Porsche. The caption read, "New job, new car, new life. Hashtag blessed, hashtag upgrade." Sarah swiped. Another photo. Jessica holding a baby onesie that said, "Future CEO." "He bought a Porsche on credit," Sarah noted dryly. "Assuming his bonus would cover the payments." "A bonus he won't get if the company folds," William added. "Let's go shopping," Sarah said abruptly. "Shopping, ma'am? You have a full closet." "Not for clothes," Sarah said, staring at the photo of the Porsche. "I want to buy the mortgage on the Reynolds estate." "I want to buy the loan on that Porsche. If the Kensington Group owns the bank, we can buy the debt, correct?" "Technically, yes. We can have the debt assigned to a holding company under your control." "Do it. I want to own every cent of debt Mark Reynolds has. By the time I walk into that boardroom, I want to own the roof over his head and the wheels under his feet." The meeting was set for Wednesday. Apex Dynamics was pulling out all the stops. They had rented a conference room at the finest hotel in the city, ironically, the same hotel where Sarah was living in the penthouse. Wednesday morning arrived with gray skies, fitting for the funeral Sarah was about to officiate, the funeral of Mark's career. She dressed in a sharp white suit. White for rebirth, white for cold logic. "Are you ready?" William asked as they stood before the heavy double doors of the conference room. Inside, she could hear the muffled voices of the Apex executives. She heard Mark's laugh, that arrogant, booming laugh. "I'm ready," Sarah said. William signaled the security guards. The doors swung open. The room went silent as Sarah walked in. She was flanked by 4 lawyers and 2 bodyguards. She didn't look at anyone. She walked straight to the head of the table, where the CEO of Apex, a sweating man named Mr. Henderson, stood up. "Welcome, welcome," Mr. Henderson stammered. "We were expecting—" Well, we didn't get a name for the Kensington representative. Mark was sitting halfway down the table. He was looking at his phone, smiling. He hadn't looked up yet. "My name," Sarah said, her voice projecting clearly across the room, "is Sarah Kensington." Mark dropped his phone. It clattered loudly on the glass table. He looked up. His eyes bulged. He blinked. Once. Twice. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Sarah turned her head slowly and locked eyes with him. She didn't smile. She didn't glare. She looked at him with absolute indifference. "Sarah?" Mark whispered, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? Are you the catering staff?" The room went deadly quiet. Mr. Henderson looked from Mark to Sarah, confused. "Mr. Reynolds, you know Miss Kensington?" "Kensington?" Mark stood up, his face flushing red. "This is Sarah, my ex-wife. She's a nobody. She was scrubbing my floors 3 days ago. Sarah, get out! You're embarrassing me." Mark moved to grab her arm. "Don't touch her." One of the bodyguards stepped forward, a wall of muscle blocking Mark's path. "Mr. Reynolds," Sarah said coolly, smoothing the lapel of her white suit, "I suggest you sit down. You are speaking to the owner of the bank that currently holds your company's fate in her hands. And, coincidentally, the owner of your mortgage." Mark froze. "What?" "Sit down," she commanded, and for the first time in their relationship, Mark Reynolds sat when she told him to. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted from confusion to suffocating tension. The air conditioning hummed, but sweat was already beading on Mark Reynolds' forehead. He looked at Sarah, his Sarah, the woman who used to clip coupons and sew buttons on his shirts, standing at the head of the table like an executioner in couture. "This is ridiculous," Mark sputtered, standing up again despite the bodyguard's earlier warning. He looked frantically at Mr. Henderson. "Sir, you can't possibly believe this charade. This woman is delusional. She's a domestic housewife. She doesn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a bedsheet. She's clearly hired actors. It's a prank. A sick, desperate prank because I left her." Mr. Henderson didn't look at Mark. He looked at William Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, can you vouch for this?" William opened his briefcase and produced a single, gold-embossed document. He slid it toward Henderson. "The deed of trust for the Kensington Group, transferring full power of attorney and ownership to Mrs. Sarah Kensington Reynolds. Notarized, filed, and irrevocable. She is your potential investor, Mr. Henderson. She is the bank." Henderson's face went pale. He picked up the document, his hands shaking slightly. He read it, swallowed hard, and then looked at Sarah with newfound reverence and fear. "Miss Kensington," Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave, "my apologies. Please, take a seat. We are honored." "Honored?" Mark shouted. "Are you insane?" "She's a fraud." "Mark, shut up," Henderson snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "One more word, and I'll have security remove you myself." Mark slumped back into his chair, his mouth agape. He looked at Sarah, searching for the timid girl he had bullied for years. She was gone. Sarah sat down gracefully. "Let's proceed. I've reviewed your proposal for the $50 million bridge loan. On paper, Apex Dynamics looks like a decent investment. Strong market share, good patents." "Exactly," Henderson smiled nervously. "We are a solid ship." "However," Sarah continued, her voice sharpening, "I have concerns about leadership. Specifically, the squandering of company assets on personal luxuries." She signaled to William. He tapped a button on his laptop, and the large projection screen behind them lit up. It wasn't a graph. It was a series of credit card statements. "This," Sarah pointed a laser pointer at the screen, "is the corporate Amex assigned to the Vice President of Sales, Mark Reynolds. In the last 3 months, while the company was supposedly in a cash flow crisis, this card was used to purchase 2 first-class tickets to the Maldives, a diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany's valued at $12,000, and, yes, a down payment on a Porsche 911. The room gasped. The other executives turned to glare at Mark. That's business expenses." Mark lied, his face turning purple. "Client entertainment." The bracelet was for a client? Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. Because I saw it on Jessica Thorne's wrist in an Instagram post dated last Tuesday. Mark, Henderson hissed, his eyes narrowing into slits. You told us that car was a lease you paid for personally. It is. I was going to pay it back, Mark stammered. Sarah didn't let up. It gets worse. I had my forensic accountants look into the commission structure Mark set up for himself. He has been front-loading commissions on deals that haven't even closed yet. He's essentially stealing from future quarters to pad his current paycheck. That is not just incompetence, Mr. Henderson. That is fraud. Henderson looked like he was about to be sick. He turned to Mark. Is this true? She's lying. She's trying to ruin me. Mark screamed, desperate tears forming in his eyes. The numbers don't lie, Mark, Sarah said calmly. But here is the deal, Mr. Henderson. The Kensington Group is willing to approve the $50 million loan. We believe Apex has a future. Henderson exhaled, relieved. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will restructure immediately. Conditioned, Sarah interrupted, on one thing. Anything, Henderson said. The immediate termination of Mark Reynolds. For cause. No severance package, no stock options, and the company must press charges for the misappropriation of funds. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark looked at Henderson, his eyes pleading. Sir, I've been with you for 5 years. I'm the VP. Henderson didn't hesitate for a second. In the world of business, $50 million weighed a lot more than loyalty. Mark, Henderson said cold, give me your badge and your phone. You can't do this, Mark shrieked. You're fired, Henderson said. Get out. And Mark, Sarah added as he stood up, trembling with rage, you might want to call an Uber. The bank just repossessed the Porsche. It's being towed from the parking lot as we speak. Mark looked out the window. Sure enough, a tow truck was hooking up his shiny silver sports car. He turned to Sarah, his face twisted in pure hatred. You think you've won? You think money makes you better than me? You'll always be trash, Sarah. I'm going home to my family, to people who actually love me, something you'll never have. Sarah watched him storm out. She felt a twinge of pain at his words, but she pushed it down. Actually, she whispered to herself, you don't have a home to go to either. The rain had returned by the time Mark got to the Reynolds estate. He had to take a taxi, which cost him his last remaining cash because his corporate card was declined. He burst through the front door, soaked and manic. Mother! Jessica! He yelled. Eleanor came rushing out of the sitting room, holding a glass of sherry. Jessica followed, wearing a silk robe, looking annoyed. Mark, what on earth is wrong? Eleanor asked. Why are you home at 2 p.m? And where is the Porsche? She took it. Mark paced the hallway, running his hands through his wet hair. Sarah, she took everything. Sarah? Jessica laughed, rolling her eyes. The maid? What did she take, the silverware? No! Mark screamed, grabbing a vase and throwing it against the wall. It shattered. She's rich, Jessica. She's the Kensington heir. She owns the bank. She owns Apex. She fired me. I lost the job. I'm being sued for fraud. Eleanor dropped her glass. It smashed on the floor, sherry staining the expensive rug. Heir? Kensington? That orphan? She played us. Mark sobbed, collapsing onto the stairs. She has billions, and I treated her like dirt. Jessica's face went through a complex series of emotions, shock, calculation, and then cold realization. She looked at Mark, broke, unemployed, and facing legal trouble. Then she looked at her stomach. Billions? Jessica whispered. Just then, the sound of heavy tires crunching on gravel drew their attention. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up the driveway. Following them was a moving truck. The front door, which Mark had left unlocked, pushed open. Sarah walked in. She was flanked by William Sterling and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. Get out of my house, Eleanor screeched, trying to regain her composure. I don't care who you are. This is the Reynolds estate. We have lived here for 40 years. Actually, Mrs. Reynolds, William Sterling stepped forward, holding a file. You haven't paid the mortgage in 6 months. You were relying on Mark's new bonus to catch up. Since that bonus no longer exists, and the bank, owned by Mrs. Kensington, has called the note, this house is now the property of the bank. You can't just kick us out. Eleanor wailed. We have rights. Foreclosure proceedings were finalized this morning, William said calmly. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. Whatever you can carry. The rest will be auctioned to pay off Mark's debts. Sarah stood silently in the center of the foyer. It was the same spot where they had thrown her garbage bags out just days ago. Jessica walked down the stairs slowly. She walked right past Mark, who was weeping with his head in his hands. She walked up to Sarah. Sarah, Jessica said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Listen. I didn't know. Mark told me you were terrible. He lied to me too. We're both victims here, aren't we? Sisters? Sarah looked at Jessica with amusement. Sisters? I'm pregnant, Sarah, Jessica pleaded. You wouldn't throw a pregnant woman out on the street, would you? You're too kind for that. I know you have a good heart. Sarah tilted her head. I do have a good heart, Jessica. That's why I'm going to give you a piece of advice. The man sitting on those stairs? He has no job, no car, no house. And he's about to be indicted for corporate embezzlement. If you stay with him, you're looking at visiting hours in prison. Jessica's face hardened. The mask dropped. She spun around and looked at Mark. You useless loser. Jess? Mark looked up, eyes red. Baby, we can fix this. We? Jessica scoffed. There is no we. I'm not raising a child with a felon. But our son, Mark pleaded. About that, Jessica shrugged. I'm not pregnant, Mark. I just said that to get you to leave her faster so I could move in. I thought you had money. Clearly, I bet on the wrong horse. Mark looked as if he had been shot. You lied? Everybody lies, Jessica spat. She ran upstairs. I'm getting my jewelry and I'm leaving. Leave the jewelry, Sarah called out. Mark bought it with stolen company funds. It's evidence. Leave it, or the deputies will arrest you for possession of stolen property. Jessica froze on the landing. She let out a scream of frustration, stomped her foot, and ran to her room to grab her clothes. Now it was just Eleanor, Mark, and Sarah. Eleanor, seeing her world crumble, tried the only tactic she had left. Guilt. She walked over to Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Though whether they were real or fake, Sarah couldn't tell. Sarah, darling, Eleanor sobbed, reaching out a hand. Please. I'm an old woman. Mark was foolish, but I'm his mother, and I was your mother-in-law. We are family. You can't do this to family. Where will I go? The shelter? Sarah looked at the woman who had criticized her cooking, mocked her clothes, and treated her like a slave for 3 years. You know, Eleanor, Sarah said softly. When I came here, I wanted a family more than anything. I would have done anything for you. I scrubbed your floors, I cooked your meals, I took your insults, and I did it because I loved Mark. She looked over at Mark, who was staring blankly at the wall. But you didn't want a daughter, Sarah continued. You wanted a servant. And you, Mark, you didn't want a wife. You wanted an ego boost. Sarah, please, Mark whispered. I'm sorry. I swear, I'm sorry. Take me back. I'll sign a prenup. I'll do anything. I love you. Sarah laughed. It was a genuine, free laugh. You don't love me, Mark. You love my money. And the sad part is, if you had just been decent, if you had just been kind, you would have had it all. We would have shared it. But you chose Jessica. You chose cruelty. Sarah turned to the deputies. Officers, I want them removed. Now. No! Sarah! No! Eleanor screamed as the deputy took her by the arm. Mark didn't fight. He stood up like a zombie, his spirit completely broken. He walked out the door into the rain, the same way Sarah had. Sarah walked to the door and watched them. Jessica was running down the driveway in her heels, dragging a suitcase, frantically calling an Uber. Eleanor was sitting on the wet grass, wailing. Mark was standing in the rain, looking at the house he had lost. Sarah closed the heavy oak door. Click. The silence in the house was beautiful. "What now, ma'am?" William asked gently. Sarah looked around the grand foyer. It felt different now. It didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a blank canvas. "Sell it," Sarah said. "Sell everything inside. The furniture, the art, the rugs. Burn the bedsheets. I don't want a single trace of them left." "And where will you live?" "I'm going to travel," Sarah smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. "Paris, maybe, or Tokyo. But first, I have one more stop to make. There is one person who was kind to me when I was nobody. I need to pay a visit to the diner downtown." "Old Joe's Diner?" William asked, surprised. "Yes. Joe gave me free soup when Mark cut off my grocery allowance. It's time Joe got a tip he'll never forget." The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the neon sign of Joe's Diner. It was a greasy spoon, the kind of place with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like battery acid, but it was the only place that had felt like home to Sarah during her marriage. She pushed open the door. The bell chimed. The place was empty, except for old Joe, a man in his 70s with a stained apron, wiping down the counter. He looked tired. Defeated. "We're closed, miss," Joe said without looking up. "Grill's off. Coffee's cold." "Not even for your favorite customer?" Sarah asked, taking a seat at her usual booth in the back. Joe looked up, squinting. He didn't recognize her at first. The expensive bob cut, the designer clothes, the aura of power. It was a disguise of success, but then he saw her eyes. "Sarah?" Joe dropped his rag. "My God, girl, is that you? You look like a movie star. I heard you got divorced. I was worried sick when you stopped coming in." "I'm okay, Joe," she smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I came to thank you for the soup, for listening when I cried, for not charging me when my card was declined." Joe waved a hand. "Bah! You were hungry. I fed you. That's what people do." Just then, a heavy-set man in a cheap suit walked out of the back office. It was the landlord, Mr. Gantry. "Joe, I told you," Gantry barked. "I don't care about your sob stories. Rent is going up 40% next month. If you can't pay, get out. I have a buyer who wants to turn this place into a vape shop." Joe sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Mr. Gantry, please. I've been here 30 years. 40% is impossible." "That's business, old man," Gantry sneered. Sarah cleared her throat. "Excuse me." Gantry spun around. "Who are you? We're closed." "I'm the woman who is about to buy this building," Sarah said calmly. She pulled a checkbook from her purse, her new Kensington private bank checkbook. "How much for the building, Mr. Gantry? And the land?" Gantry laughed. "Lady, this is prime real estate. It's worth $500,000, easy." Sarah wrote a check. She tore it out and slid it across the counter. "Here is $700,000. But there is a condition." Gantry picked up the check. His eyes bugged out. He looked at the signature. "Kensington? Wait, the Kensington Group?" "The condition," Sarah continued, ignoring his shock, "is that the deed is transferred immediately to Mr. Joe Miller, free and clear." "Me?" Joe gasped, clutching his chest. "You?" Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze his rough hand. "You fed me when I had nothing. Now, you'll never have to worry about rent again. Renovate the place, or retire. It's yours." Gantry scrambled to find a pen to sign the sale papers William Sterling had conveniently prepared in his briefcase. As Sarah walked out of the diner, leaving a stunned and weeping Joe behind, she felt the final shackle of her past break. She had punished the wicked and rewarded the good. Now it was time to build her empire, 5 years later. The transformation was complete. Sarah Kensington was no longer just a headline. She was an icon. She had taken the Kensington Group to new heights, investing in green energy and affordable housing. She was on the cover of Forbes, Vogue, and Time. She had moved to Paris for a year, learned French, and learned how to love herself. She dated, but she never married again. She didn't need a partner to complete her. She was whole on her own. As for the Reynolds family, justice had been slow but grinding. Mark had served 18 months in minimum security prison for embezzlement and fraud. Upon his release, he found that his name was poison in the corporate world. No one would hire the man who stole from his own company. Eleanor had been forced to move into a state-subsidized assisted living facility. Without her servants and her mansion, she became a bitter, lonely woman, alienating the few friends she had left. And Jessica? She had moved on to another victim, a car salesman in the next town over, but rumor had it she was drowning in credit card debt. Sarah rarely thought of them. They were ghosts, until one snowy evening in December, when the ghosts came back to haunt. Not her, but themselves. The winter in the city that year was unforgiving. It was the kind of cold that seeped through the soles of cheap shoes and settled into the marrow of your bones. Outside the iconic Plaza Hotel, a swirl of snow danced in the glow of the gas lamps, dusting the fleet of Rolls-Royces and Bentleys idling at the curb. Inside, however, the world was golden, warm, and scented with expensive perfume and roasted chestnuts. It was the night of the annual Kensington Winter Gala, the most exclusive philanthropic event on the social calendar. Tickets cost $25,000 a plate, and they had sold out in minutes. Sarah Kensington stood on the mezzanine balcony looking down at the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. She wore a custom-made creation of midnight blue velvet that hugged her frame, off the shoulder, cascading down to the floor like a waterfall. Around her neck sat the Star of the North, a diamond necklace rumored to have once belonged to a Russian Tsarina. But Sarah wasn't thinking about the diamonds. She was thinking about the journey. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she was thrown into the mud. 5 years since she had cried herself to sleep on a bus bench. "You seem a million miles away," a voice said beside her. It was William Sterling. He was retired now, walking with a cane, but he wouldn't miss this night for the world. "Just reflecting, William," Sarah said, taking a sip of sparkling water. "Do you remember when I was afraid to walk into a boardroom?" "I do," William chuckled warmly. "And now look at you. You've just acquired the largest shipping logistics firm in Europe, and tonight you're raising $10 million for orphanages. You aren't just a survivor, Sarah. You're a titan." Sarah smiled, but it was a quiet, private smile. She didn't need the applause anymore. She had found something better. Peace. Down in the bowels of the hotel, in the frantic, steaming chaos of the service kitchens, there was no peace. There was only the clattering of silverware, the shouting of chefs, and the smell of industrial dish soap. "Move it! Move it!" Henri, the catering manager, screamed, clapping his hands. "The guests are waiting for the crab cakes. If I see one empty tray, you're all fired." Mark Reynolds wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. He was wearing a white server's jacket that was 2 sizes too tight across the shoulders and smelled faintly of the previous wearer's cologne. His feet were screaming in agony. He had been standing for 6 hours straight, prepping hors d'oeuvre before the service even started. "Reynolds!" Henri barked, getting in Mark's face. "Stop daydreaming! Table 14 needs champagne, now!" "Yes, sir, right away," Mark mumbled, keeping his head down. Mark looked terrible. The stress of the last 5 years had etched deep lines into his face. His hair, once thick and perfectly styled, was thinning and gray at the temples. He had lost the weight of a well-fed corporate executive and gained the gaunt, hollow look of a man who skipped meals to pay rent. He grabbed a silver tray loaded with crystal flutes and pushed through the heavy swinging doors. The transition was jarring. One moment, the noise and steam of the kitchen. The next, the hushed, opulent hum of the grand ballroom. Mark moved through the crowd like a ghost. He was invisible. People, the kind of people he used to golf with, the kind of people he used to be, looked right through him. He offered a glass to a man who didn't even break eye contact with his conversation partner, just snatching the drink as if it were floating in midair. Mark's heart ached with a toxic mix of jealousy and regret. He knew he belonged here. He should be wearing the tuxedo. He should be laughing at the jokes. Instead, he was the help. He had hit rock bottom 18 months ago when he was released from prison. The embezzlement conviction meant no bank would hire him. He lost his license to sell securities. He had worked construction until his back gave out. And now he was working for a temp agency, Staff Pro, making $18 an hour plus tips, if the guests were generous. He thought about his mother, Eleanor. Last he heard, she was in a state-funded nursing home, complaining to the nurses that the tea wasn't Earl Grey. He hadn't visited her in a year. He couldn't bear to hear her remind him of what they had lost. And Jessica, the thought of her made his stomach turn. She was the one who testified against him to save her own skin. Focus, Mark, he told himself. Just get through the shift, get the cash, pay the electric bill. Suddenly the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the grand staircase. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. Please welcome your host, the woman of the hour, the chairwoman of the Kensington Global Group, Miss Sarah Kensington. Mark froze. The tray in his hand trembled so violently the glasses clinked together like wind chimes. Sarah? He looked up, and there she was. She descended the stairs with the grace of a queen. She looked different, stronger, sharper, more beautiful than he had ever seen her. The mousy girl who used to wear oversized sweaters to hide her figure was gone. In her place was a woman who commanded the gravity of the entire room. Mark's brain short-circuited. For a moment, reality suspended. He didn't see the billionaire CEO. He saw his wife, his Sarah, the woman who had promised to love him forever. A desperate, delusional hope bloomed in his chest. She's here. She's alone. She looks happy. Maybe she's forgiven me. It's been 5 years. Surely she remembers the good times? He forgot about Henri. He forgot about the champagne. He forgot that he was a server. He started walking toward the stairs. Hey, watch it! A guest snapped as Mark bumped into him, spilling champagne on the man's expensive shoes. Mark didn't stop. He didn't apologize. He kept his eyes locked on Sarah as she reached the bottom of the stairs, immediately surrounded by a phalanx of admirers and photographers. Sarah, Mark called out. His voice was lost in the applause. He pushed harder, shoving past a senator and a famous actress. Sarah, he yelled louder, his voice cracking with desperation. This time people turned. A hush rippled outward from the center of the room. The sight was confusing. A disheveled, frantic waiter in a stained jacket shouting at the host. 2 large security guards in black suits stepped forward to intercept him, but Mark dodged them, fueled by a manic burst of adrenaline. He broke through the inner circle. He stopped 5 feet away from her. Sarah turned slowly. The flashbulbs stopped popping. The orchestra trailed off into silence. She looked at him. Her expression didn't change. There was no shock, no fear, no anger. She looked at him with the same mild curiosity one might have for a bug crawling across a picnic blanket. "Mark?" she said. Her voice was calm, amplified slightly by the acoustics of the silent room. "It's me," Mark panted, his chest heaving. He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants. I'm here. I didn't know. Sarah, look at you." The crowd murmured. Who is this man? Does she know him? "What are you doing here, Mark?" Sarah asked, her tone devoid of warmth. "I'm working," Mark said, a flush of shame creeping up his neck as he realized everyone was staring at his cheap uniform. "Things have been hard. Since the divorce. Since everything." He took a step closer. The security guards tensed, but Sarah raised a single hand, signaling them to hold back. She wanted to hear this. "Sarah, please," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "I've paid for my mistakes. I went to jail. I lost everything. I'm a different man now. I think about you every day. I think about us." He looked into her eyes, searching for a spark of the old Sarah, the one who was desperate for his approval. "We were family," Mark pleaded, playing his final card. "Doesn't that mean anything? I know I messed up, but everyone deserves a second chance. We could talk. Maybe grab coffee? I just want to apologize properly." The room held its breath. It was a scene out of a movie. The fallen husband begging the powerful wife for redemption. Sarah looked at him. She studied his face. She remembered the way that face looked when he laughed at her while she scrubbed the floor. She remembered the sneer when he threw her clothes into the mud. She took a step toward him, closing the distance. The crowd leaned in. "You want a second chance?" Sarah asked softly. Mark nodded vigorously, tears welling in his eyes. "Yes, yes, Sarah, please." "Do you remember our 3rd anniversary?" she asked. Mark blinked, confused by the question. Yes." "You told me that I was a peasant," Sarah said, her voice clear and cutting through the silence like a diamond blade. "You told me that you needed a queen, not a maid. You threw me out into a storm because you thought you had secured your future with someone better, someone richer." "I was wrong," Mark sobbed. "I was a fool." "No, Mark," Sarah smiled, and it was a terrifyingly serene smile. "You were right." Mark froze. "What?" "You were right," Sarah continued. "I didn't belong in that house. I was destined for this. And you? You were destined for exactly where you are right now." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle on him. "You see, Mark, I don't hate you. Hate requires energy. Hate implies that you still matter to me. I don't feel anything for you. You are a stranger who is interrupting my party." She reached down to her side, opening her clutch, a small, glittering purse covered in Swarovski crystals. She pulled out a crisp, folded bill. "However," Sarah said, raising her voice slightly so the nearby guests could hear, "I always pay for good service. And you have served me well tonight. You have reminded me of exactly how far I have come." She reached out and tucked the $100 bill into the breast pocket of Mark's cheap, stained jacket. She patted the pocket twice. "For your trouble," she said. "Keep the change." Mark stared at her, his mouth open, the humiliation burning him like acid. He looked at the money, then back at her. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't going to save him. She wasn't going to scream at him. She was simply going to discard him, just as he had done to her. Sarah turned her back on him. It was the most dismissive gesture in the world. "Security," she said coolly. "Please show this gentleman the exit. He is disturbing the guests." "No, Sarah, wait," Mark stammered, reaching out. The 2 guards didn't hesitate this time. They grabbed Mark by the arms, hoisting him up. "Let me go," Mark shouted, struggling as they dragged him backward. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Sarah!" His screams echoed through the ballroom, pathetic and raw. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't turn around. She signaled the conductor. The orchestra began to play a sweeping waltz, the music swelling to drown out Mark's cries. At the edge of the dance floor, a tall, handsome diplomat extended his hand to Sarah. "May I have this dance, Miss Kensington?" he asked. And might I ask, who was that man? Sarah looked toward the heavy double doors as they slammed shut, sealing Mark Reynolds out into the cold, snowy night where he belonged. She looked back at the diplomat, her eyes bright and clear. "Him?" Sarah smiled, stepping into the light. "Nobody, just someone I used to know." What a journey! From a discarded wife scrubbing floors to a billionaire CEO, tipping her ex-husband $100 to leave her sight. Sarah's story proves that the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting, it's success. Mark learned the hard way that when you treat people like trash, you might just be throwing away a diamond. He ended up exactly where he put Sarah, out in the cold, while she danced in the warmth of her own empire. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have given Mark a second chance? Or was the $100 tip the perfect insult? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. We upload brand new drama every single day. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.